Hey, everybody. Wow, you came. You're here. This is amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say before we jump into the program how grateful I am, to all of you, to our sponsors, and to Charles and David, who really did all of the hard work that I get to take credit for. So if we could just get a quick round of applause for Charles Hudson and David Sachs. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Those people who know me know that there's no chance this would happen if I was in charge of the logistics, so thank you. I'm really very grateful. Words really cannot express how incredible this is, not just for me, but for everybody who has been involved with the Lean Startup movement these past couple of years, to watch it grow and blossom beyond its high-tech Silicon Valley roots into a really global phenomenon that you are all a part of. And so I want to start by thanking you, both for being here and for those people who are around the world tuning in. Thank you for being part of this. It's really incredible. I want to be really clear about one thing, which is that although, in the press, in blogs, and wherever, when people need to tell a story about a phenomenon, it helps to have a face, a figurehead to put on the photo or whatever it needs to go on TV or, God forbid, in magazines. And so, when they need someone who dresses like this, they put me on the cover. And when they need somebody, who has a few gray hairs, they, of course, ask Steve to do it. And if they need somebody, who is currently doing a startup, maybe they'll ask Sean Ellis. Or if they need a, VC who curses all the time, they'll ask Dave. But, none of us are Lean Startup. Really, we have the privilege of getting to work with so many of you who are entrepreneurs. I just want to make sure that we're not confused. You're not confused. You are Lean Startup. It is fundamentally a worldwide entrepreneurial renaissance that I think is in the process of changing the world. So you have my undying thanks for the hard work that you do every day that makes it possible to do events like this and for me to do really fun stuff like stand up here and talk to all of you. So thank you. Just, again, really appreciate it. Yeah. Really, this is for you, not for me. How many of you were here last year? Can I just get a quick show of hands? Can I see? OK, excellent. Thank you for coming back. And that means we have a lot of new faces. Is there anybody in the room who's actually completely new to Lean Startup? This first Lean Startup event you've been to? OK, keep your hands up. Everybody else, if you're sitting next to someone whose hand is up, if you do me a favor, introduce yourself and welcome them into the Lean Startup community. So if you do that, I really appreciate it. We have a ton of new faces. Thank you. Thank you for that. Every day, it feels like there are more and more people joining the movement. So this is awesome. Thank you. OK, you got all day to talk. You got all day, promise. We're going to be here networking. I'm still here, everybody, yeah. I know, that's the danger. You're like, listen, we're actually not that important. It's the people in the room that's important. And then, luckily, I still have the microphone, so thank you. All right, let's go over some quick ground rules. The first and most important one, obviously, in an event like this, it's important everybody brought their cellular phone. Did anybody turn it off? Have you turned your phone off? Yep. So if so, you're doing it wrong. If you take your phone out of your pocket and turn it back on. This is not a joke. Please, everybody, phones in your hands. I understand you wanted to be respectful to our speakers, but as far as I'm concerned, being off the internet is disrespectful. Not just to our speakers, but to all of our ancestors who worked so hard so that we could all be live tweeting each other's every statement. So please, phones on, tweet amongst yourselves, live blog, join the global conversation that is happening today, not just about this conference, which is on the SLLconf hashtag, but also the Lean Startup hashtag, which is really the global conversation about this new form of entrepreneurship that is happening 24/7 every day. And if you have feedback for any of our speakers, questions you wish we would ask, please tweet all of those to the hashtag. We are all religiously watching that all the time. We really appreciate your feedback. And be in touch. So I'm Eric Ries on Twitter. We'll get some slides at some point, and the blog is called Startup Lessons Learned, and just really grateful to have you all here. My job today is to give you a bit of an introduction to the Lean Startup movement, those of you who are new, and to also tell you a little bit about the state of the Lean Startup movement since last year. We are exactly 1 year and 1 month since we did this for the first time, and as I was reviewing the slides from last year's presentation, I just couldn't believe how far we've come and how much we've accomplished. We knew almost nothing about Lean Startup a year ago compared to where we are now, so it's very exciting. The first most important thing is that Lean Startup has gone global. It is no longer just a Silicon Valley phenomenon. We have Lean Startup meetup groups in more than 100 cities around the world where entrepreneurs are coming together once a week, once a month, to actually have a conversation about how can we improve entrepreneurship everywhere. And as I said before, we have more than 100 simulcast locations who are streaming live. So thank you to my friends from Bulgaria to Wollongong, Australia. Some people who are up in the middle of the night right now to watch live, the true hardcore fans. We really appreciate it. Everybody who's at a simulcast location, just if I could talk to them for a second, we are capturing photos, so please take your photos on Instagram or Twitter or whatnot and post them to the SLLconf hashtag. We appreciate it. Thank you. What's exciting about seeing entrepreneurship go global is that the power of entrepreneurship is no longer confined to fancy startup hubs like the ones that we're in right now. We are in the process of democratizing entrepreneurship so that anybody who has a good idea, anybody who has the passion and the courage and the determination and, of course, the right process can do it and be successful. I think that's really amazing. Since last year, Lean Startup has become a little bit official. We're now a number of academic institutions. I'm sure some of you have seen. I was asked to be an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School, and I think Professor Tom Eisenman is actually in the room somewhere, if he's here. Hey, he's teaching a new class called Launching Technology Ventures at HBS, where we're actually indoctrinating MBA students into the cult of Lean Startup, so thank you for doing that. Of course, Steve's pioneering work at Stanford in the Lean Launchpad. If you haven't read his series of blog posts on that, you can do that since you're all online now. Please do right now. And Nathan Furr, who I think is also in the room, has been doing actual research. Nathan, thank you, at BYU into actually figuring out what is right and not about Lean Startup. The thing to remember is that as gratifying as it is to me personally to see Lean Startup succeed and have so many of you here, it matters a lot more to me that we be right in our prescriptions. You know, as a professional talking head, the incentives are very clear. My job is to say things that sound good. And if I say things that sound good, people will read my blog and they'll put me on TV and God knows what else is coming. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we actually change the success rate of entrepreneurship worldwide. So that is our mission as a community, and I want us to really stay focused on that. That's why it's important not just that we adopt Lean Startup as entrepreneurs, and to see accelerators and incubators adopt it, but it's also important that we be conscious of what actually makes entrepreneurs succeed. What is the real facts, the real truth about what we're doing? And so I have tons of gratitude to our academic colleagues who are making that happen. Of course, there's a number of new books that are available to purchase. Of course, there's Steve's seminal work on customer development, which you should, any of you who've made the mistake of not buying it yet, since you're all online, the URL is right there. I highly recommend it. But also, I think we have Patrick Vlaskovitz in the audience somewhere. Patrick, are you here? Raise your hand. I can't actually see anything because of the lights. So Patrick is here, the author of The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, and Ash Maurya, who wrote Running Lean. We're starting to see a lot more like comprehensive guides to these ideas than we have ever had before. And in case anybody somehow is not aware of it, of course, I have a book coming out this fall, and one of the things that happens to you when you are about to become a published author through traditional publishing is you have to tell people about the book constantly, 24 hours a day at every possible moment. So thanks to the generosity of our sponsors, every single one of you in the room today is going to get a copy mailed to you on launch day. So you will all receive a copy of Lean Startup. Yes, thank you. Thank you, sponsors, for making that happen. Those of you who are watching live, we could not extend the same offer to you, but you'll notice we asked all of the simulcast organizers to collect everybody's email address because my publishing company has a special something for you, which you will all get as long as you make sure you're actually on the email list. So we'll do our best to can't send you a physical book, but the next best thing. I know what you're thinking now that I've told you you're going to get a free copy of the book, which is, of course, what on earth am I going to do with only one copy of this book? And I know, it's challenging, right? Because if you only have one copy, how are you going to share it with other people and obviously buy company, for your whole company and give it to all your friends, which I, of course, appreciate. Don't worry, we have you covered. If you just go to lean.st, we have bulk ordering available. So, okay, I promise I'll stop, but throughout the day, we will be reminding you to make sure that you've pre-ordered your copy. When you pre-order a copy of the book, not only are you helping me, which I'm very grateful for, but you're also helping the book succeed and go beyond the early adopters that you are. So we want this book to be read by mainstream customers, by the people who are causing the problems we're trying to fix. Corporate CFOs and general managers, internal innovators, the kind of people we're going to be talking about all day today. Because entrepreneurship is not just for two guys in a garage. It really is a discipline of management that we need people to understand. So anyway, that's lean.st. Behind the hood, lean.st is Rails. Parker Thompson, who's here from Pivotal Labs. Thank you, Parker, for making this happen. Pivotal, if you are interested in Rails, I heard is hiring, so just FYI. And if you go and pre-order at lean.st, you will actually get to see every single experiment and split test we have run on lean.st. You can actually watch us experiment on you in real time. And you can see that we're trying to drink our own Kool-Aid as best we can. So thank you for doing that. OK, enough promotional material. I wanted to talk about 5 lean startup principles from the book. Those of you who were able to get an early galley, you'll have seen these, and you can follow along and see if I'm staying on message or not. I'm trying. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. Entrepreneurship is management. The unit of progress for entrepreneurship is validated learning. We have to accelerate our time through this thing called the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and lastly, this new thing called innovation accounting. And I'm just looking around to see if I have some faces of disappointment, because I know you're here for a really exciting talk about the future of entrepreneurship and a whole day about the most exciting thing in the universe, startups. And I said we're going to talk about management and accounting, which may be the most boring topics imaginable. So I'm sorry. But that is actually what is needed. Entrepreneurship has become way too cool. We're having this crazy hype cycle, all this stuff. Entrepreneurship is exciting and fun. And those of you who are fans of Game of Thrones will understand what I mean when I say winter is coming. So we need to actually have entrepreneurship be less cool, because those of you who are actually doing entrepreneurship right now in a startup, you know what I'm talking about. It is not cool. Okay, it is not fun. You're not like banging on keyboards and drinking beer all day. It's actually excruciatingly difficult. And it's the boring stuff that matters most of all, product prioritization meetings, trying to figure out which customers to listen to and not, and of course, whether to pivot or persevere. How many people saw Social Network? Just a quick show of hands. OK, so that's what the image, that's like one of the great entrepreneurship movies of all time. How many people have seen Ghostbusters? I don't know if you remember, but Ghostbusters is also one of the great entrepreneurship movies of all time. You forget if you don't remember, but most of the movie concerns the difficulty they have in setting up this business on this crazy new technology that they've built for busting ghosts. And I don't know if you recall, but at the moment of their triumph, when they have their very first customer finally walk in the door, they finally make their first sale, I mean, they are on the brink of running out of money. So if you think about it, if Zool invades Manhattan a year earlier or a year later, there's no Ghostbusters. So maybe they shouldn't necessarily have invested all their money in their building and the cool car and everything in the TV ad. So anyway, I don't want to give Ghostbusters advice, but I'm saying Manhattan was at risk. All great entrepreneurship stories, including the movies, are a story in 3 acts. Act 1, the plucky protagonists, their character strengths and defects, which will be significant in a moment. How they had their idea, how they came to be in the right place at the right time with their seeing the visionary future. Act 2, what I call the photo montage. Usually lasts about 2 minutes. That's where you say, I said before, pounding on keyboards, drinking some beers, you bust a ghost, you shake a customer's hand. Anyway, after the end of 2 minutes, you're basically on the cover of magazines. And we can get past that boring stuff and into Act 3, which is how to divide up the spoils, who sues who, and of course, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And Acts 1 and Act 3 are really interesting. That's why they take up most of the movie. And my question is, how come the photo montage is only 2 minutes long and has no dialogue? And I hope it's clear now why. It's because the stuff that happens inside the photo montage is too boring to make the movie. So it all gets cut out. And yet I believe that almost every decision of consequence that causes startups to succeed or fail gets made during the photo montage. So today we are going to go inside that process, inside the boring stuff, and ask, how can we do that better? How can we improve our odds of success? And that's why we have to be talking about topics like management and accounting. So anyone who's disappointed, I apologize. So entrepreneurs are everywhere. I think this should be obvious to our crew here, but just in case. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So it doesn't matter if you're in a garage or in a Fortune 500 boardroom. It doesn't matter if you're in government or the private sector. If you do not yet know who your customer is, if you don't yet know how to build a sustainable business, then you are an entrepreneur no matter what it says on your business card, which is a fancy way of saying that a startup is an experiment. But not an experiment in can something be built. In high tech especially, we no longer have to ask the question, gosh, is that new social network possible? Can we build it? Of course we can build it. The real question of our time is not can it be built, but should it be built? And so if you think about it, we can build in our modern economy almost anything that we can imagine, including an iCal alarm. But if we're going to have GDP growth, if we're going to solve the unemployment crisis, if we're going to, as a civilization, endure, we have to get really good at imagining things. So our future GDP growth depends on the quality and caliber of our collective imagination, which is a very strange place to be from a historical moment. And of course, I think right now we are wasting people's time on an industrial scale. What's happening is we are building companies that fundamentally have no customers. We are building products that get pulled off the shelf a few weeks after they got launched, after years of R&D. And even the companies that are supposed success stories, the ones that get bought by giant media companies or get taken public by giant investment banks, even those, how many of them are really living up to the potential, the time, talent, energy, determination, and creativity that was poured into them by their founders and employees? I think in innovation hubs like Silicon Valley, we have too much become a feeder system for giant investment banks and giant media companies, and I think we can do a lot better. It has to be somebody's fault, of course, and I mean, most of my startups have failed too, so obviously it can't be my fault. That's no good, and so it's got to be somebody's fault. I prefer somebody who's dead so they can't argue with me. So I want you to meet Frederick Winslow Taylor, who invented something called scientific management. And I believe that the success of scientific management, of the general management philosophy that we learned in the 20th century, is sowing the seeds of our difficulty succeeding as entrepreneurs. The things that Fred Taylor invented are today, to us, so obvious we can't even imagine that they had to be invented at all. Like the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. I know, crazy, right? My favorite is what he called the task plus bonus system, which we call tasks. The idea that a manager could take a large project, decompose it into individual tasks, delegate it to functional specialists, and then if anybody did their work better than anticipated, they should be paid a bonus rather than being penalized. In the old days, before Fred Taylor, if you did something better than was anticipated, you'd be penalized because obviously you were sandbagging before. It just proves you're a person of low moral character. And worse, think about all your coworkers who've been doing it the old way all this time. Obviously, you're all a bunch of low moral character individuals. Everybody should be penalized. Imagine working in a work environment where if anybody comes up with a better way to work, everybody is penalized. So that had to be changed by an act of imagination. And yet, in the world that we live in, we are so good at making material things that this revolution has become too successful. And I actually think there are important cautionary lessons for us in scientific management. We're trying to bring science to entrepreneurship. And yet, some people think that science means formula or rote action. I've heard recently people saying, entrepreneurship is an art, not a science. If it was a science, everybody could do it. And I hear that, I think that's so strange. Science is a science, and almost nobody can do it. Science is one of humanity's most creative pursuits. It's extremely difficult, and it does not stand for the victory of rote formula over creativity. Instead, the creativity and vision of founders is too precious a commodity for us to waste on voodoo and pseudoscience. So that's my belief. That's something we have to do better than Fred Taylor did, because a lot of the things that he believed, we now understand were mere prejudice. He believed in something called time and motion studies, which are now discredited. He, of course, had a lot of classist and sexist attitudes about who should be telling who what to do. And he believed fundamentally in the one best way to do work. And we've learned that much work needs to be subject to continuous improvement. So my question is, when viewed through the lens of the future, which of our beliefs about entrepreneurship will be revealed to be mere prejudice? We're still chasing the great men who can lead us to certain victory, the entrepreneurs who will get it right every time. And I think that's on that list. Entrepreneurship is management, but not Fred Taylor-style management. It is a new kind of management specifically geared to the context of extreme uncertainty in which startups thrive. And so probably the most important entrepreneurial management concept is this thing called the pivot. Anyone sick and tired of hearing about pivots already? I apologize. I showed this graph last year. Last year, as a movement, we were just starting to enter the peak of inflated expectations. This is what happens when things get overhyped. And in Silicon Valley, we're really good at hyping things, as you'll see. And the pivot is one of these concepts that has just broken way through to the mainstream. I saw this last year in the New Yorker magazine. I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man. And then this cartoon made it in the mainstream. People were joking about it, and I saw that the word pivot was officially banned from TechCrunch's coverage. So pivot is now officially overused. What's so funny about that hype cycle is that in Silicon Valley, concepts go from everyone thinks it's crazy or never heard about it, doesn't want to hear about it, to it's totally overhyped without ever passing through the intervening stage of learning how to use it correctly. And that's happening to us too. So the hype is gratifying. I said last year, better to be misunderstood than ignored. But, and I guess better to be overhyped than misunderstood, but maybe we can actually get down to the work of doing the thing rather than arguing about the hype around it. You can't understand entrepreneurship without the pivot, because fundamentally, successful entrepreneurs do not have better ideas than the unsuccessful entrepreneurs. What they have is a process for discovering which part of their idea is brilliant and which, frankly, is crazy. And so when great entrepreneurs run into difficulty, they don't just give up. but neither do they persevere the plane straight into the ground. They make these systematic changes we call the pivot. You're going to hear a lot about that today. And the premise of Lean Startup is runway for a startup is defined as the number of pivots you still have the opportunity to make. And so the reason Lean Startup is lean is not because it's cheaper, not because it necessarily saves you money, but because it allows you to extend your runway without having to raise more money. That leads us to this thing called validated learning. If you go to your average startup board meeting, what's being talked about? You know, it's product milestones and are we on plan? I was once in a startup that had a plan that called for hockey stick-shaped growth. Anyone, none of you would make this mistake, but maybe you have a friend. So it has this hockey stick-shaped growth as promised, and we shipped the product and we were on plan. And for months we thought we were geniuses because the most important part of the hockey stick is that long flat part, right? And we were right on plan. Everything's going. We're like, well, this is a genius plan. Everything's perfect. We're just a few months away from it turning up. And of course, if you're on the verge of a hockey stick, how do you know if you're going to be on the long flat part forever, or if you're actually going to turn up? I believe that we can answer that question. We can put the concept of product market fit on a quantitative basis. That's actually a big part of the book, which I hope you'll all get a chance to read. When we don't do that, we have this problem we call achieving failure, which is successfully executing a bad plan. So we're building a product that nobody wants, a business that's doomed, but we're bragging about how efficiently we're doing it, right? So I have this image of general managers, driving a car off a cliff and bragging about, they're like, we're getting great gas mileage. Right, so why is it important to do things efficiently if they shouldn't be done at all? That is what we're trying to do in Lean Startup, is to say what matters is not how much stuff can we make, not how efficiently can we make stuff, but is it the right stuff at all? This should sound familiar to you if any of you are familiar with lean manufacturing. This is where the Lean Startup takes its name. This is W. Edwards Deming and Taiichi Ohno, two of the fathers of the lean production system, Toyota production system, which is the basis of almost all modern manufacturing. They had the insight that if we build products more iteratively and we examine our own process through the eyes of the customer, we can discover what really matters, the difference between value-creating work and waste. Deming famously said, the customer is the most important part of the production line. The challenge that we have as entrepreneurs is, who's the customer? If we don't even know who the customer is, then whose eyes should we evaluate our own work for value versus waste? Instead of thinking about our production processes as making stuff efficiently, making high-quality stuff efficiently, we have to think differently. Progress in a startup is learning how to build a sustainable business and being able to prove it. And that brings us to the next most important concept in Lean Startup, this feedback loop we call build, measure, learn. It looks like this. I've written this for a software company, but you can translate for your own. A software company is a catalyst that turns ideas into code. When customers interact with that code, it generates data, both qualitative and quantitative, which we can measure and then choose to learn from, impacting our next set of ideas. So I once built a product at a startup where we spent 6 months building the first version. And we argued day in, day out about fix this bug, fix that bug, add this feature, cut that. But what is the minimum viable product constantly? And we got to the point of it being like buggy and terrible. And we're like, oh, God, we're afraid to ship it. But, geez, we sure want to get some feedback. So we had this image of these newspaper headline that's like, idiot entrepreneurs ship crappy product, don't know what quality means, film at 5. But we thought, let's ship it anyway and see what happens. And we kind of are like, okay, we put it out there. And then nobody downloaded it. So at least nobody found out how bad it was. And I swear to God, I was a CTO, I was actually relieved when I heard that. I was like, phew, well, at least no one found out how bad it was. And then I was like, wait a second. Why did I just spend 6 months of my life arguing about every little feature and bug if customers couldn't even find out that the product will crash their computer? That doesn't seem right. And so eventually I had to console myself. Well, I said, the typical excuse anyone uses when you fail to execute is like, well, at least we learned this important thing about customers by shipping this thing, discovering that they don't want it. But then I had this really nasty thought, which is like, well, gosh, if my goal of the last 6 months was to learn this important thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? Right? We never used the word learning during the 6 months. We only argued with each other about bugs and features every single day. And then I was like, well, did we really need to build all that code in order to learn that customers fundamentally do not want this product? Like, what if we created a single web page with a screenshot of the product we proposed to build and a download button? Would we even have had to create page number 2 where it says, sorry, this product doesn't exist yet, or would a 404 have been sufficient? Remember what I said? They won't even download the product, so 404 is fine. Page 2 is irrelevant. But we weren't thinking that way. We were thinking, how do I build the specified product as cheaply as possible? Because we were trained as engineers to think that way. And what we need to retrain ourselves to do is to say not how to build the specification as quickly as possible. Instead, how do we figure out what we need to learn as quickly as possible? Now, there's a lot more to the lean startup model. If you go online, or I hear there's this really great book coming out, you can learn about all these different techniques in great detail. Each of them operates at a specific stage of the feedback loop, but has the net effect of accelerating through that loop. That is the way to reconcile every piece of startup advice. So next time you hear an entrepreneur tell you, listen, you got to definitely have great design, and another entrepreneur comes in and says, we actually had crappy design like Craigslist, and it kind of didn't matter. Or someone comes in and says, listen, you don't want to be the next Friendster, make sure it scales. But then someone else says, but Facebook didn't worry about scalability, and that actually worked fine. So it's like, have good design and don't worry about design, scale and don't scale all at the same time. Good luck. Instead of all this contradictory tactics, we have a framework for evaluating startup advice, which is simply, does it minimize the total time through this feedback loop, or does it sub-optimize by making us more efficient at any one of these individual functions? That's how we stop wasting people's time, is not by learning how to make things more efficiently. We're too good at that, but by figuring out the right things to build. And a year ago, this was really what I thought was going to be the mission of the lean startup movement, is that we would go around and help people not waste people's time. I thought that was pretty good because, like I said before, I think we're engaged in a criminally negligent waste of human potential on an industrial scale, and we could do something about that. But the more I have learned in the process and the more I have seen what we are up to, I think actually we have an opportunity to think even bigger. And so I wanted to share this diagram. This is from a phenomenal book called The Toyota Way by Jeff Liker. It talks about the origins of Toyota Production System and what it means for Toyota to be a company that has endured for decades. I mentioned that winter is coming. Toyota increases their market share and profitability in winter and in summer, year in, year out. And those are the kinds of companies I think we should aspire to build in the lean startup movement. And if you notice in this pyramid here, process, eliminating waste, is a very important part of it. That's something that we talk a lot about in lean startup, and it's very important in Toyota Production System. But you'll notice that it is just one slice of the pyramid, of which the foundation is the long-term orientation of the company, which is something we should strive to emulate, and which has the cause of creating a culture that supports people to actually do their best work. So although we're going to talk a lot about process today, I think we are on the brink of yet another discovery about entrepreneurship, and I tried to summarize it like this. We don't know nearly as much as they know about Toyota today. So we're at the beginning of this. But I believe if we are going to create the next Toyota, not just the next quick built-to-flip, make a ton of money tech company, the next Toyota, the company that will endure for decades and be a model for others to emulate, we need to understand the startup way. And here's my first attempt. At the foundation of this pyramid is accountability. How do you hold entrepreneurs accountable for their work? I believe that when you answer that question, and you're going to see this throughout the day, when you answer that question a specific way, the way we advocate in Lean Startup, it then allows teams to self-organize, to use the processes and techniques that we're also going to talk about all day. And that gives rise to an actual pro-innovation culture which empowers people to do their best work. If you think about most of the problems that people try to diagnose, I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about, not in your startup, of course, because everything's working great and you're going to be really successful, but maybe you have a friend. And in your friend's startup, like when something's going wrong, we tend to want to stay at the top of this pyramid and say it's that person's fault. We need to get a better product manager. We need a more visionary CEO. Or if we're a little bit more sophisticated, we'll say, we just have a bad culture. We should change the culture. And if you see all this startup advice, number one is be as visionary as you can, which is like be as awesome as possible. And if you're not awesome, too bad for you. And next up is you should really be focused. Have a great culture of focus or a culture of great design. All these pieces of advice where you're like, gosh, but how do we be focused? Telling a startup to focus is like telling someone who's obese to lose weight. It's like, yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. I know we should focus, but we've got 10,000 different things coming at us. How do we choose? In order to actually have a constructive culture, we need a process that works. And I believe fundamentally part of the secret sauce of Silicon Valley is that we have begun to learn how to hold innovators accountable in a new way. That is really the breakthrough innovation of the venture capital community. And yet the model that we are using, as you'll see throughout today, is outdated, and we can do a lot better. So to build that foundation, we need this thing called innovation accounting, which I promised would be the most boring thing imaginable, and yet I believe is essential if we're going to build as a community the next Toyota. It looks like this. Instead of using product milestones and flat hockey stick-shaped business plans, we need to use learning milestones instead. So I identified 3, and these are in the book if you want to learn more. The first, establish the baseline using a minimum viable product. Who's got a business plan with a spreadsheet in it? Show of hands. Come on, raise your hands. I know you do. Who has if you look at that spreadsheet and you find somewhere in there, you'll find a little box that says something like 10%. And if you kind of trace it over in 3-point font, you'll see a line that says like percentage of customers who will download our product. And if you think about the bulk of the business plan, this 3-point font box takes up a very small amount of space, relatively speaking, and yet it is a leap of faith assumption. If 0% of people will download our product, everything else in the business plan is irrelevant. So we need to have that not in a tiny little box in the back, but in a giant red banner up in our office. Like, by the way, our business model does not work if this number is not 10%. And so learning milestone number 1 is just to discover right now, all those inputs to our business plan, what are they right now? Like, what's the level of customer demand for our product today? And if it's 0%, that's not necessarily bad news because now we have facts. Right? Better to have bad news that's true than good news that we made up. And then once we know the truth of where we are right now, then we can do this thing I call tune the engine to try to get our engine of growth humming. And I believe there are 3 fundamental engines of growth. There's the paid engine of growth. There's one called viral and one called sticky. There are different ways that products grow. Each of them has different math and different analytics that are essential to success. And when we try to tune that engine, we watch the numbers in our baseline eventually converge to the awesome numbers that will cause our hockey stick shape to happen, or we don't. And if we don't, if month in, month out, we reach diminishing returns on those key metrics, then it is time to have a serious conversation about whether we need to pivot or persevere. That's such an important meeting, I recommend that you schedule it in advance. Right? Most entrepreneurs are like, well, the plan is everything's going to work out great, and then if there's a problem, maybe we'll talk about doing something different. But come on, what are the chances that your plan is 100% correct? There are no documented examples that I'm aware of a company that got everything right on the very first try. It's exceedingly rare if it ever happens. And so just to be safe, let's schedule a meeting for 12 weeks from now where we will just evaluate, hey, are we on track or is it time to pivot? And the goal of a lean startup is not to make those pivot decisions formulaic. We can't do that. But what we can do is ensure that you have the facts in the room that you need to make an intelligent decision. And the lesson of the scientific method is, although we are fallible in our human judgment and intuition, if we make clear predictions about what's supposed to happen, we allow ourselves to fail, then we can train our judgment to get better over time so that our pivot decisions become less and less ridiculous. I've left a bunch of questions unanswered, and I hope we have time for a few questions. We're going to practice the Q&A format that we're going to use all the way down to the rest of the day. So we're going to have people with microphones here, and we will have them bring up when it's time for questions. Okay. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that, actually. Never mind. But later we will have questions. And I left these questions unanswered, which is, how do we know when to pivot? What is the relationship between vision, strategy, and product? What should we measure? How do products grow? How do we know we're creating value? What's in the MVP? And most importantly, can we go faster as we scale? Of course, these are going to be the topics we're going to talk about all day. And like I said, I heard there's this really good book coming out that will answer many of them. Thank you all really very much. Thank you.